Hello and welcome back for another episode of this season of Try This on Wisp Sports. I'm your host, Dr. Kirsten Lauritsen, and we are back into training, that's for sure, and getting ready also for another race coming right up. We have, so this past week, as far as like training and stuff goes, it was just all pretty light stuff. And I'm actually headed into another taper now because I have the Salem, Oregon 70.3 Ironman, the half at July 25th. So a couple weeks out. And it's coming up really quickly, already back into getting, all of the pre-race stuff and check-in times and all of that. The course, I think, is going to be a really fun one. It's going to be fairly flat. So that'll be something very different from what I'm used to, since most of my races have generally been in the mountains and with hills. So I'm kind of curious to see how this race goes and some of the differences with doing a more flat course. And what's nice about this course as well is most of it is an out and back. One of the things about the swim that's going to be a little bit weird is that apparently you set up your bike and then you have to walk a mile to get to the swim start. And then you'll swim yourself back to your bike to get on it and head out. So that'll be kind of interesting to do, especially morning of it, 5 a.m. in the morning, but we'll see how that goes. Today, what I wanted to talk about, because I think that this is one of the things that I wish that we had done, but we wouldn't have known that I needed to do it before the Coeur d'Alene Ironman is heat acclimation. So what happened here in the Pacific Northwest is the temperatures were supposed to be, maybe 70, 80-ish that weekend. And then about a week and a half out, it became this huge major heat wave came in, and it was going to be 108 degrees plus. And in some areas, it got even hotter than that. And so the thing is like in 70, 80 degree heat, you could do heat acclimation if you wanted to, but it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense. However, for 108 degrees, that would have been nice, but you can't do that really. You can't acclimate to the heat in less than a week. It just doesn't really work like that. So what I wanted to talk about though, is what happens when we get exposed to heat, and then how you would, potentially go through heat acclimation, because it's actually a little bit different between men and women. And so that's what I wanted to cover here today. So what are some of the things that happen when, or like why we would need heat acclimation and to get acclimated to the heat? Well, first off, if you can get your body used to 100 and plus degrees, then it will feel a little bit more like it's 60 or 70 degrees when you get into the heat. So for anybody doing hot races, that would be one of the first things you want to do, because number one, when you get into the heat, there is a lot of stress that goes on your system. And because of how your body is trying to manage your core temperature, as well as trying to reduce, to get rid of that heat, it'll send blood all over the place. And one of the things it'll do is that blood will leave your gut. So we get a little bit of that leaky gut started, which is where a lot of that GI distress can happen when we're training or when we're racing in the heat. Again, I don't know if you guys listened to that episode, but there was a lot of GI distress that was very apparent in the porta potty areas on the run of the Coeur d'Alene Ironman. And that part of that is a breakdown in fueling, but also part of that is probably not being used to the heat. And for somebody like me who does not tolerate the heat well, and in past races has gotten a lot of GI distress symptoms, for me not to have GI distress means that I did in many ways get my fueling right. So there's that. That's a piece and a portion of what needs to be worked on when going into a hot race. and just races in general, is how do you use fueling that's appropriate and good for your body physiologically so that you actually use it and you don't end up further dehydrating yourself and causing GI distress. And that would even include, potential cramping for those athletes that do tend to cramp up a lot, especially when it gets hot. The other thing that another reason why you would want to get acclimated to the heat is that when you're in the heat and you're not acclimated, your heart rate goes up. So does vasodilation. And that's what you do to offload that heat, right? So like everything seems to swell up. You get this like swollen face and hands and all of these different things. Your feet swell up because your body is trying to send all of that blood out to your periphery and to your skin to try to offload the heat. So some of the goals that we have when it comes to heat acclimation is, first off, we want to bring that resting heart rate down, right? Because that's going to help us with that overall, like how much you can do in the heat. When we bring that the resting heart rate down, that'll also help a little bit with recovery and a lot of other things too. The second thing that we want to do is, when we're exercising or when we're at a race, if you are acclimated to the heat, it will bring your heart rate down. And that's important because it gives you a little bit more bandwidth or room to push, right, your efforts without skyrocketing your heart rate. There's some other things that happen as well. So there's more blood every heartbeat if you were acclimated to the heat. So what this essentially means is that when there's more blood, and we'll talk about what I mean by that as far as like blood volume and plasma volume and things like that. But when there's more blood going out with every heartbeat, then first off, you're able to get that blood to the muscles, right? Like that's obviously the most important thing. So that means more oxygen, it means more fuel for the muscles. So that's a really, really important piece. But it also makes sure that some of that blood goes to the skin so that you can offload the heat. Another thing that happens too is GI distress goes down and you're not getting as much of that leaky gut. And so that's intestinal permeability. We've talked about that before, but essentially what it means is that there's just a ton of inflammation in the gut, and now you're not going to be able to digest your fuels very well. Lots of stuff like that. So GI distress definitely goes down when you're acclimated to the heat. But I would put a caveat on that. Like if you have kind of like constant rates of intestinal permeability or leaky gut, then, you're just compounding. If you're putting your body through like an Ironman stress, or you're putting yourself through a Ironman in a very, very hot, or any type of endurance sport in the heat, you're just putting inflammation on top of inflammation essentially in the gut. And so there's a lot that you can do to help, first off, fix that just outside of sport. But then there's a lot of things that you can do to balance that as well. I mean, those are like things like making sure you're getting some amino acids in. So branched chain amino acids or glutamine, which helps to prevent some of that leaky gut from happening when we're doing those long endurance sports. This is one of the things that I work with the most with athletes, is making sure that their GI health is on point so that when they do go into those races, then they have not only the fueling and things like that they need to keep that leaky gut from happening as much as possible, and those changes that happen in the gut bacteria during those longer races, but also just making sure that the stressors that get into their system don't end up, creating more leaky gut and intestinal permeability, and then ending up with GI distress and things like that. The other thing too that happens when you get acclimated to the heat is your ability to sweat also goes up. So lots of because there's been, when you go into heat exhaustion and then like really, really, really bad levels of heat, you can stop sweating. And that's when things are really bad. So there's lots of different ways that you can work with your physiology to improve your ability to perform in the heat. And again, the whole point of it is to make 100 degrees feel like you're exercising in 60 degrees. So there's a couple different ways to do this and some things to keep in mind. So what are some of the adaptations that happen when it comes to heat acclimation? Number one, just as we talked about, sweat rate goes up, which is a really good thing because it's part of how you offload a lot of the heat. And that's part of, so some of the adaptations to help you do that, as far as to improve your sweat rate, and also to be able to get some of that heat and offload it through the skin, is number one, when you get acclimated, your plasma volume goes up, and you also increase your red blood cells, which helps you, have more oxygen. So some of the benefits of that is like some athletes will go and train in like Colorado, or like that's where one of the USA Olympic training centers is in Colorado. And the reason for that is because it's in altitude. So if you're going to be going anywhere else in the world, and just for athletes in general, if you are training at altitude, what that means is over the course of, weeks to months, you'll build up more red blood cells, which helps you to carry more oxygen and all of those things, right? So one of the things we want is to increase red blood cells. We want to increase plasma volume, which means basically that your blood gets a little bit more like watery. If you've ever seen athletes that are not in a good state when they get in the heat, their blood can become really viscous, so almost like thick, and that's not good. That's definitely not what we want. So we really want to have more watery blood. And that means that not only is circulation going to be better, but then again, like more blood's going to be leaving the heart, all sorts of things like that. The other thing another adaptation that happens when you're heat acclimated is time to fatigue and delays. So your time to fatigue goes down. And then also there are delays in increased core temperature. And that delay also goes down. So what you basically want is to try to keep that time to fatigue. You want to try to keep your core temperature down as much as possible, so that, you really want that time to eventually, when your core temperature does increase, it just takes a lot longer. And then what's interesting too is some of these things happen already. So like in the female women's cycle, when you're in that first phase, so the follicular phase right after your period, that phase is where you actually tend to have a lot of these adaptations to heat anyway. Like you just manage heat better. Whereas in the luteal phase, you don't necessarily, which is why it can be really important if you know, again, so this was for me, if you know that you are going to be racing and you're going to be in that luteal phase, it can be very helpful to be acclimated to the heat. So one of the things that I wanted to talk, and the other point I wanted to make on that is that heat acclimation can actually really help to kind of create a more level playing field between two women. Like if one is in the follicular phase and one is in the luteal phase, you can kind of even that playing field a little bit if you do spend a little bit of time getting acclimated to the heat. There's two words that can get a little bit confused, and I wanted to kind of clear up some of the confusion over them, because this is something that I learned recently. Heat acclimation is a simulated environment, which is what we're going to talk about next. Heat acclimatization is when you go to the environment you're going to be training in or racing in, and you basically just spend a long time there to be ready for that climate. For example, like you might go to train in Kona. Again, you might go to train in like Colorado. You're going to those places in order to get acclimatized to the weather. And that can be helpful depending on where you're going, because some places have more humid heat, some have more dry heat, lots of that. But the problem is though, is that most people can't really leave their like normal everyday life for months and months to go train in whatever environment they're going to be racing in. Like that's just not normally very easy for people to do. So there's many ways to so instead of using heat acclimatization or just any type of acclimatization, we can use heat acclimation, meaning we simulate that environment. And you can actually do it while exercising, or you can do it passively. And we're going to talk just briefly on each of those. There's a lot more to go into as far as how to apply it, but I'm just going to briefly kind of cover it. So keep listening, because we'll be right back with more after this. So one of the things to do if you're going to try to be getting acclimated to the heat passively is to exercise, and then to be in that already somewhat dehydrated state, and then get into a sauna. So what ends up happening is when you do that, because you're already dehydrated and you're not trying to hydrate right away, and then you get into the heat, what ends up happening is some changes happen with your blood, and it's essentially sends a bunch of signals to the kidneys that we need to make more red blood cells. So there's a lot of hormones that go into that then end up signaling that we need to start raising that up. And then that's what ends up helping to increase that plasma blood volume and circulation that we were talking about. What's interesting, though, is there's some differences between how it used to be done versus what they found through research now. So the standard protocol that used to be done was you would do this like 2 sets of 5-day blocks in heat exposure. And then in between those 2 5-day blocks, you'd have about a couple of days in between of not being in the heat. And so then what would happen in each session, like you would do this like workout, it'd be about 90 minutes and then around 40 degrees or so Celsius. So again, that's going to be about 98 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're actively working in that 90-minute heat. What's interesting about that is that it does work and it can help. But what they did find is that men only actually really need 4 days or so in order to really get those benefits. And maybe doing a block or two, but what they found in some of this research is that just in 4 days, men acclimated to the heat well from doing that. However, women, it's a little bit different. Women need about 9 days with a break in between in order to really get those benefits. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you would apply that before going to a race, because you really want to do this in a way that you have still some time before your event so that you can go into taper. So as I said, there's things that you can do. There was some research that was done just on women who were in that follicular phase, and you needed to do this like 20-minute like pre-session thing, and then you would go back in after a little bit of a break and then do more work in the heat. And a lot of these intensities are not very high, right? They're maybe at like 50 to 60% of your effort, max effort. So not super high intensities, but that intensity would eventually increase, as you got later into those blocks of time. And again, you're training, like you would have like your bike in the room where it was like 100 degrees. However, you don't necessarily have to do it that way. And you can do this in many different phases. Like that could be like a long or medium term. But you can also do, if you don't have the ability to, move your bike into a sauna and train in 100-degree heat, what you can do is do it passively. So what that would look like is you would want a minimum of about 30 minutes, 6 to 7 days in a row. And after you're finishing your workout, so either this might be at the gym or maybe you just finished up with your pool workout, you would go and go to the sauna, or if you have like a hot tub or a sauna at home, after your workout, you just go pop into that. And the point though is that you really don't want to start drinking a ton of water right away. What you want is to kind of be in that dehydrated state. You can kind of take your protein drink in there and maybe slowly sip on it, but you're not trying to guzzle a bunch of water. Like you're not trying to take a ton of hydration in, because what you want is to really stay in that dehydrated state for kind of as long as possible so that you get that stress on the system to start, promoting and bringing on some of those red blood cells and increasing that plasma volume, right? So let's say you're sitting in that sauna or maybe a hot tub, 30 minutes or so minimum. So you could be in there for up to an hour if you wanted, 6 to 7 days in a row, and you'll get some of those adaptations. What you'll get is a plasma volume increase. You'll get a little bit of red blood cell increase. And you will see an improvements in performance in the heat. But don't forget, if you get out of that sauna though, and you start taking on a bunch of water, you'll actually kill the stimulus that's trying to bring on those adaptations. What you need is a very slow rehydration over 3 to 5 hours. And that's pretty vital if you're going to try to implement this passive way of doing it. Because the exposure to the heat, when you're in that dehydrated state is that very strong stress. So that's why you've got to do that. So then the other thing is too, what you need to remember as well is that when you go through some of these heat stressors, sometimes they can create, you kind of are walking a line here. The reason why you don't want to go too high in intensity is because you can actually make yourself sick. You can get this kind of general feeling of fatigue and malaise and things like that. So something you want to make sure of, and you have to, I should also say, like if you're in the follicular phase versus the luteal phase, you can do this at any time of your cycle, but it is important if you know you're going to be racing in that luteal phase, that it is a good idea to do this ahead of time. And what you really want to do is you want to think about doing this whole process about 2 weeks before your taper, so that you have pretty much a good solid 10 days before your event. That's to help your body recover. It's to help your body get basically ready to go for it, and you won't lose those adaptations over that time frame. But the goal is to have a strong stress and then some recovery, and then again the next day a strong stress and then some recovery, and you just go through this process so that it helps your body adapt quickly to the heat exposure. But remember, if you're going to be doing that passively, you have to make sure that you're doing it in that dehydrated state, and you're not just you're trying to rehydrate right away. If you're not sure how to do that, and if you are actually in a dehydrated state, one of the things you can do is you can use these things called pH urine strips, and you can test your pH and see if you're getting into that dehydrated state. And then you can use those to make sure that you're staying somewhat in that dehydrated state for 3 to 5 hours after that event. And that's after your training and then after your time in the sauna, and making sure that you're not rehydrating too quickly. That's a great way to do that. So, and also keeping in mind too, as I mentioned, there are ways that you can do this actively, but if you don't have access to that kind of environment where you can increase the heat and train in the heat, then you can still do this in a way that's a little bit more passive. So that's our episode for now. I would say I will probably be trying to use heat acclimation for races in the future because I think it can just be helpful in general to, especially for me, since I don't really tolerate the heat very well. And we learned that the hard way this year. I'll definitely be trying to use this method of doing things in the future. But thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Wisp Sports on all social media channels, and make sure to share this episode with anyone you think may love it. What would be really awesome too is if you do listen to this podcast and you've enjoyed the episodes, it would be really great if you could go to whatever platform it is that you're listening to this episode on, is to go and leave a review. Couple stars, leave a review, let us know how you like it. That would be a huge help as far as getting this podcast out to more people. You can also follow me at Dr. Kirsten on Facebook and Instagram. And also you can find anything about me and more at drkirsten.com. If you'd like to reach us with any comments or questions about this episode, you can at info@wispsports.com. And you can always leave a direct message with either of us over on social media as well. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be back next week. Take care.